Welcome to the Backs to the Wall podcast. Four mates talking all things football with some special guests and sporting shenanigans as well. This week on the wall, chaos in Scottish football, a week of controversy surrounding the SPFL's plan to finish the season now, with leaked WhatsApp messages, missing votes and claims of bullying. We will debate the SPFL's actions and what it means now for Scottish football. As well as that, it's our new feature, Send Them to the Reserves. We discuss players who have been particularly poor both on and off the pitch, and we will send one of those players to the reserves. And lastly, the lockdown ACA continues. We give our selections in Belarus, Nicaragua and Tajikistan. So a cloud of uncertainty had descended over Scottish football this week. Jamie, why don't you get us underway and explain what's been going on?
So amidst all the turmoil that's been going on in Scottish football during this terrible time of coronavirus, the SPFL decided that they would cast a vote amongst all the members of the Scottish Premier League Championship, League 1 and League 2. The vote was to determine whether or not to end the seasons now, but they needed a 75% majority vote to end the seasons now. A lot of clubs seem to really want this motion to be passed because they were really struggling financially. Teams like Wright Rovers, Albion Rovers, to name a few.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion on this is really fairly strongly that this vote should not have been passed. I think it was really too soon to make this decision. I think they could easily have waited another couple of weeks into May, maybe even the start of June. Now, I understand that the clubs that wanted this passed, a lot of them were doing so because of financial reasons, and they felt that really they had no other choice. They didn't want to wait another couple of weeks for fear of going out of business. But I think that another resolution could have been passed, and there was another resolution tabled, but the SPFL didn't seem too interested in debating that last week, and that resolution would have been that minimum prize money could have been paid out to teams now as a loan, and if the league could have been completed at a later date, then full prize money would have been paid out, and that would have been my preferred view. But now we're in a situation where Dundee have cast their final vote. They've voted in favour of it, so yeah, it's happening. Championship, League 1 and League 2, the seasons have been called.
And I suppose, what does that then mean? You mentioned that, Jamie mentioned a couple of those teams who would be particularly in trouble in terms of their financial situation, but what does that mean for teams who are, say, bottom of the table, like Jamie's team, Partick Thistle, bottom of the table, have a game in hand and they're only 2 points back?
As you say, it does have a massive implication for myself and thousands upon thousands of people across Scottish football. Partick Thistle fans, Hearts fans have a bit of uncertainty at the minute, Stranraer fans. It's truly a bizarre set of circumstances to be left in. I mean, it feels so hard to take that we do have a game in hand to play against Inverness. I don't understand the reasoning of having this vote so soon. I mean, English football, they're not doing anything about this yet. They're not putting any sort of votes across. I mean, if Partick Thistle do get relegated, we've been in League 1 before, and it's not the end of the world. There are far more important things going on around the world. It's just really hard to take. So I wasn't in favour either of null and voiding the season, because I don't feel that's fair either on people like Wraith Rovers, Dundee United, Celtic, Cove Rangers, who are at the top of their leagues at the minute. But I think there's got to be a better way to do this.
From my point of view, I think finishing the league as it is now is probably the most ridiculous thing you can do. There's over 20 points to play for. And I mean, anything could happen. You can have different people winning the league, different people promoted, people can fall off form. Give Sunderland as an example, when in our 13-14 season, we were 7 points from safety with 6 games to go, and we stayed up. I mean, if we got relegated then, just on the spot, you're just kind of scratching your head at the decision.
I think as well, part of the biggest problem for many of us, even neutral fans like myself, is the SPFL have made the situation worse for themselves by their actions, or their lack of actions have attracted conspiracy theorists and the rest, asking themselves, why are they doing it this way? And they've said very little as well. They've been far too quiet. Perhaps if they had been more clear about, if they'd said, this is the reason why we have to do this. I know they've said that there's no other way, but we're hearing all the time that, hold on, there is another way this can be done, and hopefully a fairer way for all the clubs.
It can explain a little bit more about the way the vote was cast. The SPFL came out and it was a pretty quick turnaround. They said that they had this proposal of ending the leagues now, and they gave the clubs a day or two to think about it, really. They gave a guideline of wanting this to be submitted by, I think it was at 5 o'clock on Friday or last Friday or Saturday. But then you didn't have to follow those guidelines. You could wait another 28 days, which, one, that seems pretty bizarre. So most of the teams, it appeared, did vote on Friday. However, again, bizarrely, the SPFL, they were willing to show the results during the vote when teams hadn't voted yet. Basically, when Dundee went to place their vote, it was obvious to everybody on social media that Dundee were the only ones that hadn't voted yet. Well, it's between them and Inverness. So it puts a lot of pressure then on teams like that, or it gives them added incentive to perhaps change their vote. And as things have gone, Dundee, they supposedly placed a vote, which was a no vote, which would have shut down this whole thing and meant that the vote did not pass. There is a picture of their voting slip, which has obviously been leaked in WhatsApp.
Yeah, so a lot of the chairmen of these clubs were in a WhatsApp group. I was listening to the Inverness Cally Thistles chairman on BBC Sports Sound, and he was totally confused because he had already seen the Dundee voting slip, which had been signed to reject the resolution, and he had received his solemn word from the Dundee managing director, John Nelms, that they were going to reject the motion. So I suppose it's about asking what changed throughout the afternoon and evening.
So something's going on. I think Dundee have obviously realised that they are the casting vote because of the stupid way that they were carrying out the vote in the first place. They Dundee even put a place of power. And Gordon Strachan had come out in the days before. He's the sort of footballing director at Dundee. Yeah. And he'd come out and said that he couldn't see Dundee voting anything other than no, and that league reconstruction would be a path that they would like to go down. So I believe that if they have seen that they're the casting vote, they hold all the cards. The SFA have obviously, it just something stinks.
If anything, it was meant to clear things up, but now we're sitting with more problems, and it's just so bizarre as to what's going on. I don't think anyone can sit and honestly understand what is going on, because they've announced that the league title winners are going to get promoted, but at the minute we don't know if anyone's going to get relegated. That's another weird thing about the situation right now.
I think what strikes me about this whole thing is just how unbelievably unprofessional the whole process has been. And the thing is, the SPFL and the SFA, they've both got track records for poor decision making, for unprofessionalism just like this. This is not the first time that they've let themselves down, and they've made the Scottish game really look a bit stupid. I can think of a couple of examples from recent years. 2018, the League Cup semi-finals, Aberdeen against Rangers, Hearts against Celtic. The SFA scheduled them to be played on the same day at the same stadium, Hampden, one in the afternoon, one in late evening, and only when fans and police pointed out that it might be a little bit silly to have 4 sets of fans in the same place at the same time did they change their mind and schedule it on different days. A couple of months ago, there was the Scottish Challenge Cup semi-final between Inverness and Rangers under-21s. Inverness won the game, but they had their striker, James Keatings, sent off for a second yellow card. Now, I watched this game, and this was one of the worst refereeing decisions I think I've ever seen. He was booked for diving, even though his legs were totally cleaned out from underneath him. Inverness rightly appealed that red card. It went to the tribunal, and amazingly, they turned it down, even though there was undeniable evidence, video evidence, that this was the wrong decision. And then, a couple of days later, a statement comes out saying that actually we need to do the tribunal again because one of the panel forgot to watch the evidence, forgot to watch the video about the red card. I mean, they've just got a track record of being totally incapable of running football. As Jamie says, this whole situation, it stinks. It absolutely reeks. It is, in my opinion at least, at best unprofessional, and at worst verging on corruption.
I don't really understand how Dundee Football Club have been allowed to effectively stick their hand back into the ballot box and pull out their voting slip and change it.
I think one thing we're definitely going to look at, or one thing they're going to look at now is league reconstruction. I think that's an interesting point to get into. With the Lowland and Highland League, it looks like they're proposed both of them getting promoted. So I don't know what that's going to mean for the 4 leagues as a whole.
Yeah, well, the fact that they've not come out and said anything about relegation yet is a little bit bizarre, because we don't know if the leagues were reconstructed. Partick Thistle could stay in the Championship, they could go down. Brechin, we don't know what would happen with them. Would they stay in League 2, even though they're well off the bottom at the moment? They would have to play in the playoff, wouldn't they, against the Highland League and Lowland League winners, the winner of that playoff game. That won't be happening now. So again, but we're guessing. Everyone is guessing because of the radio silence, effectively, from the SPFL, who just don't seem to be able to tell us. I
mean, we're recording this. What day is it today? Wednesday. Tomorrow they could release it on Thursday that all the teams are getting relegated. We just don't know. We're in that situation at the minute.
Anne Budge, the chairwoman of Hearts, and Les Gray, chairman of Hamilton Academical Football Club, they've been assigned to be head of a task force which is focusing on league reconstruction. This sort of shows that perhaps Dundee are getting a bit of the way that they wanted. They wanted league reconstruction, and this is a way that it could happen.
And of course, that it's ironic. Well, not ironic, but Anne Budge owns Hearts. Hearts are bottom of the Premiership and would stand to be relegated if the Premiership was also called for the season. So the only way that they can actually save their skin at the moment is for the leagues to be reconstructed.
Do you think that the league would benefit from being reconstructed?
Well, I think it's been talked about for years, hasn't it?
Yeah. I think it's also one of the only fair way to do this, so that there are no real losers in this situation, because Partick Thistle, Stranraer and perhaps Hearts are going to really, really suffer from this, or teams from the Highland and Lowland League, if they don't get the chance to come up into the sort of the footballing pyramids of the top 4 leagues. I think league reconstruction is the only fair way now to really go about it, or it's the only sensible approach that's been put onto the table.
I think there's so much uncertainty with everything. I mean, the lockdown at home, we don't know how long we're going to be at home for ourselves. So I mean, you can't really expect footballers to go out and play during this time. I was looking today, Alberto Colombo, the Deputy General Secretary of the European leagues, said that the vast majority of the leagues within Europe will return at some point, and they're looking to play behind closed doors, which I think in the scenario where we find ourselves, that is the best option. I think you have to look to try and finish the season. Like I was saying before, finishing it the way it is ludicrous. If you go on to void a season, what does that even mean? In England, below the national leagues, they've just voided them. I mean, a team near me, South Shields, they're top of one of the leagues. We're going to win the league, and that's just voided. Does that mean player stats are just cancelled for that season? I mean, you've got managers that have been sacked, that just it doesn't count anymore. There's just so many questions at this minute.
I suppose the fact that all the other European leagues, barring Belgium, although they only had one league game remaining, so you can see why they ended their season early. All the other European leagues, as you say, have said that they intend to carry on at some point. Now, that leaves a situation where in Scotland, teams might not be playing now until about October, possibly, because it might take that long to finish the current season across Europe. What would the Scottish League do if they were to restart? If they were to start the next season, we don't know when Champions League qualifiers, Europa League qualifiers, when they would be scheduled. It would just be an absolute mess.
It begs the question as well, is why, when around Europe few leagues are doing what Scotland seems to be doing, it just again makes you sort of points towards the SPFL just maybe taking the wrong approach.
I think one thing that suggests to me is definitely the financial aspect. I mean, you look at a lot of the teams that are especially, well, they've voided the below the national leagues in England, which will all be semi-professional. You look at League 2, League 1 in Scotland, most of them semi-professional. They can't really sustain without ticket and revenue. So I think they need the prize money to continue as a club. I seen the EFL said that they were planning to return for the 6th of June. Teams and players would reconvene at the end of May to have a short pre-season training and then get ready to go behind closed doors. I mean, again, you don't know at the minute whether that will be possible or not, but it seems like everyone else apart from Scotland is playing the waiting game.
There's whispers all over, but people are saying that on the inside people have hidden agendas perhaps in the SPFL. Like Scott mentioned, that people don't take Rangers fans or the club too seriously when they release a statement, because they do tend to do it quite often. But I think they've got a little bit of substance at the minute. I would be inclined to listen or to see what they're going to come out with when they're saying that the SPFL maybe aren't maybe fit for purpose.
I think one last point on this from me is that the question for me is, how are clubs in Scotland so close to a financial cliff edge that they're willing to end the season now, throw sporting integrity out the window just to try and survive? Because they're clearly, some of them have intimated that they are days, maybe weeks at best, away from going under. How are clubs in this country so financially stricken that they feel that they had to vote in favour of this? I think that's a pretty damning indictment of the leadership of Scottish football, that their clubs are in such an unhealthy financial position.
One final point for myself as well would be that the SPFL have released a statement, or in their statement, that no league football can be played in Scotland until August in their eyes. But then in England, it seems that they're hopeful of getting the league up and running in June, and then even if that gets pushed back, there's a couple of months between then and August. So why are Scotland taking this stance? It seems really bizarre.
Yeah, it's once again, it's making Scottish football look like a laughing stock, really, I think. And as I said, it's not the first time.
The manner of which it's been conducted is just so bad, like we've been saying. I mean, if we'd got a decision on Friday and it had been voted the way it is, you'd be like, okay, that's bad still, but at least it's kind of followed it on. But when you've got a case of every team bar one voting on Friday and then waiting until today, I mean,
and changing it to a yes vote from a no. How are you allowed to do that?
Yeah,
it is crazy.
Even the deadline issue, everyone was made to believe, really, up until the deadline passed, that this was a hard deadline, that you had to have your vote in by 5 p.m. on Friday, and then suddenly we get a statement a couple hours later saying, actually, no, it wasn't a hard deadline, it was just sort of a suggestion. You've got 28 days to cast your vote. Now, again, it's massively, massively unprofessional. It's staggering to me how much of a failure the SPFL have been over this.
One thing I wanted to just ask, I mean, I've got plenty of experience with relegation, but not on this matter. I just kind of want to get your thoughts as like a Park Thistle fan, Jamie, on this, as to what it means for the club if you were to get relegated in these circumstances.
As a season ticket holder, and I have been for the last 3 or 4 years, as well as my brother, it's going to be really difficult. We've had a terrible enough time for the past sort of 3 years with getting relegated from the SPL and then struggling to stay up last season. But now to have the threat of being relegated to League One on a vote, it seems completely unfair, especially as we're 2 points behind with a game in hand. As a Thistle fan, I think I would love to be able to play the remaining fixtures. If we go down, we go down because we've been terrible. And for a lot of the season we have been. But you take it if you got relegated fairly. But to get relegated with numerous games still to play and having played a game less than the teams around you, it's just really, really hard to take. And it's upsetting.
So on a slightly more light-hearted note, why don't we introduce our new feature, the Send Them to the Reserve segment. We'll each nominate a player who we think's been particularly poor, and then we'll vote to decide who gets sent to the reserves. So who would like to start first with their nomination?
Go on, Scott. I bet you've got a good one.
Yeah, well, if this was down to me, I would actually nominate the entire 2012-13 Rangers squad. However, since I'm only allowed to pick one, I will go with Francisco Sandaza, the Spanish striker. Now, he arrived in August 2012, just after Rangers were about to start their fantastic journey down in Scottish League 2. He arrived with quite a good reputation. He'd played a full season for St Johnstone in the Scottish Premiership the season before, scoring 14 goals. He arrived at Rangers down in Scottish League 2 in the 4th tier of Scottish football, and he scored, I believe, 3 goals in the time he was at the club. 3 goals in Scottish League 2. Now, the reason I'm nominating him mainly is actually because of the way he left the club. he was on the phone with someone who claimed to be a football agent, and Sandaza told this person who was claiming to be a football agent on the phone that he was only at Rangers for the money and would leave in an instant if an alternative money was made. Now, of course, the club heard about this, and he was very quickly blackballed out of the club, having offered nothing. And that's why I'm nominating him.
Next then, Jamie, who would you like to send to the reserves?
I mean, as soon as we debated having this sort of segment on the show, this one player came to mind. It goes back all the way to 2013 to the Scottish Challenge Cup final. It was then known as the Ramsden's Cup final. Partick Thistle played Queen of the South, and in goals for Queen of the South at the time was a goalkeeper called Lee Robinson. I just remember during the game he just seemed to be a bit of general time wasting when Queen of the South went 1-0 up, and when we got our equaliser and the game went to penalties, he would come out towards the penalty taker and try and put them off. He would even, I think in an instance, he touched the ball, he went back, and before the penalties would be taken, he went up and he kicked the mud off each boot. He was just a complete and utter arse. Yeah, I had a bit of a dislike for him then. I didn't actually see him play for a while after that, as Thistle obviously got promoted into the SPL. And we were there for 6 years. But however, I did see him last season. Thistle were playing Dunfermline away at East End Park. Dunfermline won off a Christy Elliott mistake late in the second half. And as the full-time whistle went, completely forgetting that this was the same goalkeeper that had annoyed me in this Ramsden's Cup final, he ran towards the Partick Thistle away support and he gave some interesting and you'd say offensive gestures. I'm not going to describe them any more than that. But he doesn't seem a very professional player, and one that I really do have a dislike for.
I'm going to jump into a Sunderland player first up. Probably not my first of many Paolo Di Canio, Roberto Di Fanti signings in that era. First up, I'm going Jersey Altidore. Now, this is one on stats I'm going off. I've got nothing against Jersey as a guy. He was a 100%er. For some reason, he was a fan's hero. When you've got your fans chanting on the stands as the strikers warm up, preparing to come on the field, when Jersey scores were on the pitch, suggests that your striker probably isn't scoring that often.
But did he not have quite a good spell before you guys? Was it as Alkmaar?
Yeah, he was there. He scored about 20 goals for them, 20, 30 goals in about 40 games, which probably why we bought him for a reported fee of around 13 million euros. You're thinking, well, he's done all right there. He big guy, 42 games in the league. He played for Sunderland, scored 1 goal. He also had a spell at Hull, played 28 games, scored 1 goal for them. So it's in total 70 Premier League games and 2 goals. Had a little look online. John O'Shea is a better goals to game ratio for Sunderland than what Jersey Altidore does. And voted on top of that, he was voted the number 100 worst strikers in the Premier League history. I think I've got quite a strong case.
I mean, he's got similar goal-scoring attributes in the English Premier League to Connor Salmon.
But one thing I'd like to add that might get him back on track, he was probably one of the best bits of transfer business I've ever seen in Premier League history. We managed to swap him for free with Jermaine Defoe, and I don't even need to say anymore.
Lastly, for myself, I'm going to nominate a player who has played for both Scott and Andrew's teams, Rangers and Sunderland. It's the one and only Senegalese El Hadj Diouf. He joined Sunderland in the 2008-09 season, and the then manager Roy Keane stated he was happy that El Hadj had joined Sunderland, saying, "Diouf has always been the kind of player opposition teams and supporters hate. That's why we're delighted to have him now in our squad." He did make a promising start for the team, but failed to score in any of his appearances. Eventually, he ended up at Rangers on loan, scored once there. But the main reason why I've nominated El Hadj Diouf is the pretty consistent allegations that he used to spit at players and fans alike. There were several occasions where he was actually charged by the police and docked wages by several of his clubs. Whenever he was at Bolton, he was docked a couple of weeks' wages for spitting in the face of one of the Portsmouth's players, and it was the then manager Sam Allardyce who considered sending him to see a sports psychologist. So El Hadj Diouf, he's plenty of stories about his time in English football, and that's why I'd like to send him to the reserves.
Okay, should we have a vote then? Who has put forward the strongest case for our first reserve player?
I mean, I didn't see myself voting any other way than for Josie Altidore, but Michael's put forward a pretty convincing case with El Hadj Diouf.
It really depends, I suppose, what we're basing this on. If we're basing this on a player who was just shockingly bad at his job in scoring goals, then it's Josie Altidore, isn't it? But in El Hadj Diouf, you've a player who just spat on people.
I think when you look at this feature, it's kind of a mixture of both. You've got players that aren't doing so well, and then just players that you pure and simply don't like.
Yeah, I just can't stand Lee Robinson. I mean, just to add to it, he happens to be from Sunderland as well, so.
Well, he's definitely not going in the reserves then.
Yeah, I'm going to just say now, I think my vote it's been swayed, and my vote goes towards El Hadj Diouf.
Yeah. Well, if this segment was called "Who is the biggest arsehole?", then it's quite clear that El Hadj Diouf would get my vote. But I think Andrew's actually made the most compelling case here to pay that much money for a striker who scored one Premier League goal in an entire season. I think that's pretty damning. So Josie Altidore gets my vote.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Scott in this one. I actually had seen, whenever I was doing a bit of research into players who have been particularly poor, and Josie Altidore was towards the top of many of those lists just for how disappointing he had been. So, yeah, Josie Altidore for me.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to stick with myself. I think I did a wonderful job.
Well, no, hold on. You cannot vote for yourself.
I'm sorry, this guy scored 2 goals in 70 games. He's a striker. He has to go to the reserves. I'm sorry, Josie. You're a nice guy, but get to the reserves.
Yeah, well, hopefully, perhaps one day, if we can get in touch with Josie Altidore, he might, in fact, come on the Back to the Wall podcast. That would be fun. But yeah, so that's it settled then. Josie Altidore is officially on the reserves. Hopefully, we'll do this segment again next week. I suppose that just leaves us with one more thing on the wall, and that is our lockdown accumulator. How did we all get on last week?
No surprise for me. Mine got beat. Started off promisingly. Big old Kuptash won 3-0, but energetic BGU, the bastards let me down. Lost 2-0.
Yeah, for me it was a win, a loss and a draw. Sort of sums up my general betting.
Yeah, I think I got 2 out of 3. It was my Tajik team that let me down. I can't pronounce them, so let's just move on.
2 out of 3 for myself as well. I took the early kickoff on Saturday. FC Slutska of Belarus, they drew 1 each, so
never back the early kickoff.
Exactly, yeah.
So that puts us all on -5. Promising start to this segment. It actually reminds ourselves we've all got a promising history of betting. I remember when we were living together in second year at university, we actually put on a £200 bet.
We basically had a fines jar within the flat for if any of the members of the flat were to do anything wrong or perhaps out of character, you had to pay a small fine, but this went on for quite a few months, so as you can imagine, they mounted up to £200. We quite rashly opened it on something like a Tuesday night. We should have waited until football was on, but we cracked open the tin, saw all the cash, and decided we had to get that, put in a bet there and then, drove into Ladbrokes, and picked, what was it, a team from, it was an ice hockey, a basketball, and an American football.
I believe it was Miami Heat, Oakland Raiders, and Michael, you might need to tell me the ice hockey team.
It was the Columbus Blue Jackets. I think they lost. Yeah, they lost in overtime in the end. It didn't matter because the bet was already beat at that stage, and our £200 had gone up in smoke.
It's quite possibly the most depressing morning after the results were in of my life. I remember just walking around the flat. Nobody spoke to anyone. It was just such a somber mood in the flat. And also feeding the machine in Ladbrokes £200 in cash was one of the most ridiculous things we've ever done.
And considering that we wanted to buy a TV at the time and walk past a nice flat screen TV in B&M for £200 a night, was pretty heartbreaking as well.
And that's the reason why we're giving you all betting advice.
Yeah, it's very sound advice as well. We've all done really well in that first week. So anyway, who have we all picked this week?
Well, my boys Kuptash won 3-0 last week, so I seen they were 4-1, so I was like, I'll have a bit of that. Team in form. Belarus, I have FK Islok Minsk. They're at home to FC Slavia Mozia. Sorry about my pronunciation. And my Nicaraguan team is Juventus Managua, away at Deportivo Las Sabanas. No odds yet on that game. Just picked them because they've got Juventus in their name.
I went for an away win for Slavia against Islok in the Belarusian league. Nicaraguan league, I went for a pretty safe one again. I like that team Managua. They held the fort last week and propped up my terrible betting form. We go to Tajik league, and I went for an outsider. I went for bottom of the table Dushanbe 83 against Faizkand. I mean, I don't think this is going to come in, but the reward was too much.
Love an upset.
Yeah, funnily enough, I've actually gone with that one as well. Dushanbe 83, yet to register a point, lost 7-0 in the first week, but I'm backing them to get off and running at home this weekend against Faizkand. In Nicaragua, I've also gone with Juventus Managua, and in Belarus, I'm sticking with one of my teams that won last week, Dynamo Brest. They are away to mid-table side Vitebsk.
Yeah, I've kept it pretty simple this week, just going for 3 aways. FC Minsk of Belarus, Walter Ferretti of Nicaragua, who you had last week, Scott. They won 1-0 last week. And Faizkand of Tajikistan, hoping for better luck this week. Only one team beat me at the weekend, so fingers crossed we can get all 3 up.
And I'm sure all our listeners will be following our lead here and betting on these 3 leagues. But one last thing to say is always bet responsibly.
Remember, if you have done a lockdown accumulator this weekend, send it to us so we can have a look and you can play along with us. We're all -5. You could be ahead of us right now.
So that just about wraps things up for this week's Backs to the Wall podcast. We will be back, of course, next week with episode 3. And hopefully we'll have some very special guests coming your way soon. Remember, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, all the rest. Please remember to subscribe and leave a comment as to what you'd like to hear on the wall. And we hope to have you listening again very soon.